Hey everyone, welcome to Mom Talks. I'm Laura, your host for today. We are continuing our sports series today with Dr. Neppel from our orthopedic team and Young Athletes Center. We are talking about injury prevention. So absolutely send us your questions. We want to hear from you how we can keep our athletes safe, because what we've talked about a lot this last month is how our kids are accidentally getting hurt. But there are ways to actually protect them and keep them safe. So thank you so much for being here today, and tell us a little bit about what injury prevention is.
Sure. Thanks again for having me. So we treat a lot of injuries in our young athletes. I mean, millions of these injuries happening every year, and many of these injuries are preventable. So we would love to prevent these injuries before our athletes are ever injured. Many of the injuries can be related to overuse, so is an easy way to prevent injuries, certainly with monitoring activities and avoiding those overuse things. But they're sort of depending on the sport, we have a variety of strategies we can use to keep our athletes healthy and on the field.
So there's not just like one and done cure-all thing. It kind of depends on their sport of preference.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely what we see when we look at different sports. You're going to be injured much differently if you play soccer versus you're a cross-country athlete. So I think there are some overarching strategies, but there are also specific things, hopefully to lessen the risk of specific injuries. So overarching concepts, especially nowadays, we see a lot of sports specialization where athletes are playing single sport year-round, often not having rest, sometimes playing on the multiple club teams at the same time. And we have better and better studies and literature that support that clearly is a risk factor for increasing the risk of injury, especially these overuse injuries, so that there may be a role for that, but it's best left until kind of the high school age. And if athletes are specializing at younger ages, I think extremely important for parents and coaches to be understanding of these concepts and implementing cross-training and other things to give the athlete's body and their growing bones varied stresses, so it's not the same thing every day all year round.
It makes me think of soccer, because indoor season and outdoor season, especially this time of year, are overlapping. So you might have your outdoor league starting while you're still wrapping up your indoor.
Yeah,
and soccer is one of those.
Soccer is huge in our region, that we have so many kids playing soccer and so many opportunities out there that I think that is probably the most common early specialization sport that we encounter.
Okay, so what is with soccer? Let's start there,
Sure.
since it is so popular and we are in the heat of that season, because I have a kiddo in indoor soccer right now. What are we doing to help these kids? How can we help them protect their, I assume it's ACLs, knees, or what kind of body part are we looking at there?
So I think we see a variety of injuries in soccer, from muscle strains like hamstring strains to things like concussions, which it sounds like have been talked about recently on one of these events. Maybe the most serious major injury we see with soccer would be an ACL tear. So ACL tears, especially in females playing soccer, are extremely high risk, probably the highest risk sport that we encounter. ACL tears, many people think of kind of as like broken bones, that they're traumatic and we can't prevent them, but most ACL tears actually happen from non-contact mechanisms. So our athletes are cutting or pivoting or jumping, not running into someone else, and they tear their ACL just doing those kind of things. And those kind of mechanisms certainly have some role in how the athletes are moving, and if they're moving in poor ways, it puts them at a higher risk of these injuries. And there are programs out there to prevent ACL injuries as well that I think should be better adapted in our region.
So the one we use at St. Louis Children's Hospital through the Young Athletes Center is the FIFA one, correct? So the governing body of soccer, so it's validated, and obviously your team all believes in it. So it's all about basically, is it muscle memory that we're trying to teach our kids to prevent these injuries through stuff like this?
Yeah, so I think neuromuscular training is sort of the general concept that we think about, connecting the brain to the movement pattern. And with ACLs, there's been decades of research here in the U.S. as well as in Europe that FIFA's sort of taken a nice effort and put together the best level of evidence into a program that is basically a dynamic warm-up program. So we all probably grew up sitting in a circle and stretching, counting to
touch
10.
your toes, do the windmill.
I think those days are over. That there maybe is a role for that, but probably not in warm-up. So that dynamic warm-up, getting the athletes ready to be moving and adapting to how they move, appears to play some role in injury prevention in ACLs, but also those other things, those hamstring strains. FIFA is a great program because it's free. It's easily available. You can download it from the website now. Through the Young Athlete Center, we've emphasized a lot of this in outreach to try to help teams and schools have the expertise to implement FIFA. So we help to teach the coaches and the athletes how to do these exercises, and then hopefully it's something that can carry on going forward, because there's great evidence in younger athletes and in older athletes that this prevents injuries that take them off the field. There's probably some performance enhancement that comes from these exercises, as well as hopefully decreasing the risk of ACL tears. And there are other programs out there. We've liked FIFA because it's free, I think, which helps it to be adopted. It's also been used in non-soccer sports, so FIFA's obviously associated with soccer, but it's been shown to work in basketball. You just have to modify some of the activities. So it's what we've really think is the current gold standard. We want to use programs that are proven, not sort of picking and choosing and making up our own. So hopefully in the years to come, we can be utilizing these programs more broadly, and hopefully preventing some of these injuries from ever happening.
So it sounds like it's almost like a stretching 2.0. Stretching is important, and we want you to stretch, but then this dynamic training is a big part of it. Maybe the basketball kind of touched on this, but does it matter if you're on turf or grass? Does that aid or help, or should we be thinking about that as parents as our kids are signing up for leagues to avoid turf? Or
so I think
does that make a difference?
There's certainly small effects of the playing surface that we sort of see a lot of more turf nowadays compared to a decade ago, but all turfs aren't the same either, so that the amount of fill in a turf and different turfs may be different. So I don't think we completely understand the risk. That overall we probably think the risks are relatively similar. There may be small differences.
So regardless of the surface you're playing on, these kind of injury prevention stretches, movements are going to potentially help.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so we touched on basketball, we touched on soccer. What's another one? Baseball?
Sure. So baseball, extremely common cause of injuries and overuse. A lot of publicity in the last decade on Little League Baseball and pitch counts and things like that have, I think, made a major influence in preventing these injuries, so that most clubs and schools are abiding by some restrictions nowadays, which has helped. There's other injury prevention that can happen in baseball, certainly, that these throwing athletes should be doing some exercises and stretching as a maintenance. So we've, at Children's and the Young Athlete Center, I've put together a program that you can download from the website, and I think we'll link it up with this.
We will add all this to the comments.
Post. So it's called the Throwers 10, which is 10 simple exercises that we think every throwing athlete should be doing. So if you're a pitcher on the Cardinals, for example, you're doing all these things, so why shouldn't we be doing these in our younger athletes to avoid them from ever having these issues?
And I like the fact that we're teaching the coaches. This isn't just being the parent who is, very cognizant of kids' overuse injuries or kids' just accidents happening, but I like the coaches being an advocate too. And so we'll put links to all of these on how to register for these kind of classes and the classes that we do offer for just coaches and then coaches and kids.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that it's got to be everybody. It has to be as parents, we need to understand what sports our kids are involved with, what are the common injuries, is there evidence that we can prevent some of these. We need the kids engaged if they're gonna do this. If most of the time, if they understand that this might avoid something that takes them off the field, they're on board. And then the same thing with the coaches, so that for all these programs, we're through the Young Athlete Center bringing teams into our spaces, bringing athletes and their parents into the space to learn these things and hopefully set them up to stay on the field. It's
supposed to be fun. Sports are fun. I think we have a question.
Are there any injury prevention tips for my cheerleader?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Sure. So I think every sport has its associated injuries. I think cheerleading we think of as sort of innocent, but cheerleading, has really high rates of catastrophic injuries compared to some sports, and then things like concussions are extremely common cheerleading as well. There are great resources out there for parents and athletes to understand sport-specific injuries that they should be thinking about. So StopSportsInjuries.org is a nice national program that's supported by most of our sports medicine societies that you can download the cheerleading pamphlet to talk about injuries that we see in cheerleading, but certainly concussions and falls would be at the top of the cheerleading list. In gymnastics, we see a lot of overuse injuries. They're putting in so many hours doing the same things over and over that those kind of wrist injuries and lower extremity injuries are extremely common. That making sure we're maintaining strengthening programs within our gymnastics training, I think, is important as well.
I think that's a great point. You might notice that we are not in the Young Athlete Center today. We're actually on location, people. We're hitting the road. What conference are you speaking at today that I pulled you away from?
Sure. Today we're in Chesterfield at the 12th annual WashU Sports Medicine Update, so a full day-long program here for physicians, physical therapists, athletic trainers on the latest and greatest of injuries and injury prevention. So this morning we talked about ACL injuries in young athletes and the research and the current thoughts behind that, and they have a great day-long program. This is all headed up by Mark Halstead, who's the medical director of our Young Athlete Center at Children's as well.
So there you go. We're educating professionals and parents. So all good information for all of us to have. Keep the questions coming. We love them. Let's see. What other areas have we not talked about? We started a bridge program. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that's going to help kids not get hurt? Or if they've already been hurt, how we're going to keep them from getting hurt again?
So I think through the Young Athlete Center the last few years, we've really been trying to expand our outreach services to help athletes in our area access these services. These aren't easy things necessarily to get. For example, for someone who's never been injured, you're not going to get insurance to pay for physical therapy or those kind of things. So our bridge program fills two big holes for us. So one of those is the recovery after an ACL. Reconstruction is extremely long, up to 6 to 9 months of physical therapy, and sometimes the insurance at some point will stop.
That's losing a whole season for some kids. Like you're out for the year or more.
So certainly of the longest recoveries that we go through, ACL is it's a marathon to recover from an ACL, and to lose the ability to work with a physical therapy when you're getting so close to the end and starting to focus on sport-specific activities is really hard. So what the Bridge program does is it offers an opportunity to do those end phases of your rehab, the sport-specific rehab, in our Young Athlete Center space under the supervision of an athletic trainer or physical therapist for a small fee that's generally less than an insurance copay to fill a gap for athletes so that they don't have that missing link to getting them back to sports. The other opportunity that fulfills for us is utilizing it for neuromuscular training in those athletes who have never been injured. So sometimes we get whole teams who are excited about this stuff and we can train the whole team, but sometimes coaches may not be excited and the parents may want to seek out training for their kids. So we can bring in healthy athletes and kind of get an assessment and teach them things to be working on to hopefully set them up for the future to avoid injuries. We focus a lot on the high school age where injuries become maybe most common, but we love to be teaching our young athletes these proper movement patterns and things at a young age, because I think that's ultimately going to be the way that we have the best decrease in injuries down the road, by catching them at a young age to train them.
Yeah, it seems like putting in the time for injury prevention or just awareness, knowledge, effort, it might, like you said, save you 9 months, because ACL, that sounds pretty traumatic. And, I've learned that kids who are athletes are just a different breed of kid, and if that is their passion and what they're focused on, to take that away from them can be really emotionally hard on them and kind of change their identity in some ways. So it seems like injury prevention is a good way to keep our kids on the field, whether they've been hurt before or not.
Yeah, and I think the evidence that continues to accumulate, we're not too far from maybe someday some of these things being part of gym class in elementary schools and things like
totally makes sense.
Why not teach them and affect a large number of athletes rather than just waiting until they're a little older and they get injured, those kind of things.
I love it. I'm trying to think if I have any other questions. What did I miss? Surely I missed something.
Yeah,
Any other sports that you're seeing?
So I think other programs we've developed, so we're trying to expand our portfolio. Running, I guess, is another common overuse
They don't run.
injury. So that we have a similar to the baseball program. We have a runners a program that also is downloadable for kind of things we think are really critical to keeping our running athletes healthy. So I think the children's website and the Young Athlete Center website is a great place to go to summarize these things. We've got great offerings. If teams or parents and coaches are interested in these things, let us know. But we'd love to have athletes coming into our space to learn about these things. In some cases, we're going out to the schools and things to implement these strategies, because I think, at least in our region, maybe we're not at the front of the curve for preventing injuries, and that many of these strategies aren't implemented. For example, the ACL prevention, even though we're sort of in an environment that's clearly soccer crazed and has
so many
thousands of
leagues
in
there's so many select leagues within the St. Louis region and the metro area, and kids traveling to this area for soccer. So it seems like I like the flexibility of it too, that if your kiddo just needs specific help, or you can do it in a small group maybe with your team, or it's the whole team having that conversation of how we're going to protect our kids and keep them on the field.
So this last year we've started to work with Lou Fuse Athletic, and there are lots and lots of soccer athletes out there to get these programs implemented for the teams that are interested within their programs, because often we find that parents and coaches aren't too worried about injuries till it happens to the best kid on the team at the worst time of year. So that we'd love to be doing these things ahead of time to avoid those issues from ever happening.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much again for joining us. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be here. We will see you next week. We are talking to Dr. Smith about overuse injuries. So kind of in the same vein, but different sports, different elements to it. So we will see you on Friday at 11. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk soon.